Chapter 9, verse 18. So this is going to be sort of an illicit story. So if you don't think you're old enough for it, you can leave. But hopefully you can handle it. But before we get into it, there's a verse later on in chapter 35 that will be helpful if we read it. Now, you know what tribe the kings of Israel are supposed to come from? Judah. Good. Why Judah? Judah, you would think maybe it would be the firstborn. So the firstborn of Jacob, right, we're talking about the tribes of Israel. And the firstborn of the tribe of Israel is Reuben. And the second one is Shimon. And the third one is Levi. And when I was in Charlotte, my first job, there was a guy who converted. He changed his name to Ruvain. And it was sort of like, it was a nice guy. I doubt he's watching, but it's sort of like an annoying guy. And he used to always he was like one of those guys that like scheduled meetings with the rabbi just to talk. Like really annoying. Like, yeah, there was no point to the meeting. He's just, I'm here. So one time I had a meeting with him. It was like every day, but I had like a meeting with him. And I said to the senior rabbi, he asked me to do something. I said, I can't do that. I have a meeting with Ruvain. And he said to me, oh, don't worry, I cancel him all the time. For whatever reason, I remember that. Well, Ruvain in the Torah got canceled. And so did Simon, or Shimon, the second one, and so did Levi, the third son. And the fourth son was Judah. And he was the first son that didn't get canceled. So the kings came from him. That's it. That's why. What's so great about Judah? He didn't do anything so horrible. He did have some problems with Tamar, but so Simon and Levi, after Dinah was raped, they went and killed everybody. And their dad said, that seems a little extreme. So maybe the kings shouldn't come from you because you're just going to kill everybody. Okay, so that's Simon and Levi, son 2 and son 3. But what did Reuben's son 1 do wrong? Okay, well, very good. So let's take a look at it. If you just hold your spot where we are in Noah, but skip with me to chapter 35 of Genesis, verse 22. Chapter 35, verse 22. Does everyone have a sheet, source sheet? Okay. $2.34 in Platt. Okay. $2.34. $3.96 if you have the Saperstein, which is the one I recommend. Okay, everyone have it? Or anyone have it? Norman, do you have it? No? Edith? What page? 234? 234, Norman.
Not in my book.
Not in his book. All right, maybe you have the different edition.
And the new plan.
Oh, okay. Who does have it? Stuart, would you mind reading it? Sure. Here you go. Can I give it?
God now said to Jacob, get up, go up to Bethel and settle there. Erect an what?
Verse
No?
22. And it came
22.
to pass.
I thought you said 35:1.
Sorry, 35:22. Our only goal today is to find this verse and read it, and then you'll be excused. So it'll take another 45 minutes. We'll find the verse, we'll read it, and that'll be the class.
Now,
rush.
while Israel was residing in that area, Reuben went and lay with his father's concubine, Bilhah, and Israel heard of it.
So that's it. That's all we need. So what Reuven, Jacob's away. Israel and Jacob are the same person. And Reuben went and had relations with his dad's concubine. And at some point, now he's not there. Israel's somewhere else, or Jacob's somewhere else. But at some point he hears about it. and he's not very happy. Now, according to the rabbis, why did Reuben do this? He did this because his mom had died. And, Rachel had died. His aunt had died. And Jacob's favorite wife was Rachel. So Reuben thought, now that Rachel's dead, his new favorite wife is going to be his mom, Leah. But instead, Jacob was showing that actually his second favorite was Bilhah. And that annoyed Reuben because he felt that his mom was being dishonored. So he went to the woman. Who his father had, chosen instead of his mom, and basically forced himself upon her, and that was the sin. But my point is, he had a reason to do it, and this was how he. Well, I mean, there's no rationalization. It's disgusting, and it's a sin. But this was how he tried to get back at his father. So I'm just pointing out that this is something that happened in biblical times. There are a few other examples in the Tanakh of this happening. But in order to understand the story that we're going to look at about Noah right now, we have to see that this is something that happened once in a while biblically. Okay? All right, so now knowing that, let's skip back to our Torah portion, chapter 9, verse 18. And when the flood is over, there's this story that happens with Noah's wife and Noah's sons. Now, we don't know the name of Noah's wife from the Torah. We only know it from the Midrash. And according to the Midrash, she was a woman named Naamah, or Naamah. It's a beautiful name, a common Israeli female name that means pleasant. If you ever fly on El Al and they mistake you for an Israeli, they'll say, Tisa Ni'ima. Have a pleasant flight. Ni'ima Na'ama. It's the same root. Okay? Also, there's the male name Noam. Noam is the masculine form of Na'ama. Okay? Now, who is she? According to the Midrash, she's the she's the daughter of a guy named Tubal Cain. Have you ever heard of Tubal Cain? I think Tubal is also the name of someone in one of the Shakespearean, I forget which play, there's a character named Tubal. Tubal Cain means Cain is the name, we know the name Cain, he's the guy who killed Abel, but what's Tubal? Tubal in Hebrew, tevel, means spices. In modern Hebrew, it's tavlinim, spices. Right? So this guy's name was the Spices of Cain. So Cain was known as he was the world's first murderer. Tubal Cain was a blacksmith who spiced up he was a blacksmith. He made weapons. He said, I don't want you to have to kill people like Cain did with your hands. I'm going to make it easier. I'm going to make weapons. That's how he spiced up being Cain. That's why, according to the Midrash, he's called Tubal Cain. But if you're Naamah, that's not like the greatest lineage. You come from the guy who invented weapons, right? There's already a little bit of negativity to Naamah. Not that there's anything wrong with Naamah, there isn't. But what happens to her isn't so great, right? And it's sort of forewarned there. Now, Noah has 3 sons. Shem, Cham, and Yafet. Now, when you hear Cham, and he's the bad one, but it's written in English, Ham, don't think that that's because he was unkosher, because his name was Ham. Ham is just the English of Cham. His name wasn't Ham, right? That'd be an unfortunate name for a Jew, right? Ham. So Shem was the good guy. Shem later on becomes Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He lives forever, and he becomes Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's mentor. And he's the one who teaches them ethics. He also, according to some traditions, is the same guy as Melchizedek, the king of Salem, who Abraham meets and he offers Abraham food when he comes to go for the Akedah. So Shem's like the good guy, and in his spare time with his partner, he used to review movies, right? Because his partner was Eber, Shem and Eber. And in their spare time, the two of them got together, and Ed and I every year get a kick out of that. All right, yeah. Always 2 thumbs up with Shem and Eber. Yafet was like the okay guy. He was good looking. Yafet means good looking. He's famous mostly for he's not great, but he's way better than Ham, and he's pretty good, but he founds a city that another city that's a little more famous gets founded next to about 100 and so years ago. Jaffa. Yafet is Jaffa, right? He founded that city, which is an ancient city. Tel Aviv is a new city, but Jaffa is the ancient city. And Ham is the bad guy. And we're going to see what happens from him. Now, who's one of Ham's? Ham has 2 sons. One of his sons is named Egypt. And his son is named Egypt. And he founded a country that maybe you're familiar with in Africa by the same name. His son was Mitzrayim. But he had another son named Canaan, right? Which is a city in Connecticut. No, it's New Canaan. No, but Canaan is what? Israel before it's called Israel. Before the Jews get there, the place is called Canaan, and the people who live there are called Canaanites, and they're terrible. They're a problem, and we have to kick them out. Right? So, but who is Egypt and Canaan? They're the sons of Ham. Okay, so you see things are starting to develop. Okay, clear so far? All right, so now let's get into it. You're going to be amazed by this, I think. If you're not, then you won't be, but I think you might be. I think you might be. Okay, verse 18, Norman, here we go.
Noah's sons who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham, he was the father of Canaan.
Okay, so they all had sons, and they all had other sons. But the only thing the Torah tells us is that Ham was the father of Canaan. Now, Ham had other kids. In fact, Canaan was the youngest. He was the 4th of 4. So why are you telling us? You see what I'm saying to you? In verse 18, you have 3 brothers. They have lots of different sons between them. But the verse only tells us about one specific one. Now, Canaan, we know, is what's going to become Israel. So we know that there must be something very interesting about Canaan that we need to know about that's coming up. Yeah, that's what we have so far. Okay, let's keep going.
These 3 were Noah's sons. From these the whole earth was populated. Noah, a man of the soil, was the first to plant a vineyard.
Okay, by the way, so if Noah has 3 sons and they're going to inherit the whole world, Adam's sons were going to inherit the whole world too. But Adam had 2 sons, right? Cain and Abel. And they were each going to get half the world. So Shem, Ham, and Japheth are saying, hey, I'd like half the world too. Now I'm only getting a third? What is this nonsense? Right? They're not as happy because they're not getting as much. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Because Ham has 4 sons. And his sons are going to say, you know, it was one thing when I was only going to get half the world. My father's only going to get a third of the world. Now you're telling me I'm only going to get a quarter of the world. What's going on here? What kind of inheritance is this? I'm supposed to live off, $100 million? What is this? How am I going to live like this? Right? I wanted to buy a house around here. Can't do it. Right? Okay, so there's something to be said for a decrease in inheritance from going from 2 to 3 to 4. Okay, let's keep going.
He drank of the wine and grew drunk and exposed himself under his tent.
Okay, so again, I'm sorry, we're going really slow, but there's a lot here. There's a very rich section. There are a lot of clues here. So here's the next clue. What happens in verse 20? He plants a vineyard. And in verse 21, he drinks. Now, I don't know if you've ever planted a vineyard, but you don't just plant it and then say, the wine's not just there. So, how much time? Do you know that at the end of Genesis, this is how I meant to start. The end of Genesis, there's 70 Jewish souls that come down to Egypt with Jacob. That's the end of Genesis, 70 Jewish souls. Exodus 1:1. Jews are now in Egypt. There are so many Jews that Pharaoh's so worried that if there's a war, the Jews are they're gonna side with someone else, and you know that's gonna be very dangerous for us. So we better enslave them because there's so many of them. There are only 70. So you have to ask the question: how much time elapsed between the end of Genesis and the beginning of Exodus? And the answer is hundreds of years. I mean, it took a long time. Now, there was also a miracle, and every time a woman got pregnant, 6 babies popped out. And so the Jewish people were born through a miracle in Egypt. So actually, you might say, if you're Pharaoh, I don't blame him. These Jews are popping up like crazy. It was one thing when there were 70, but now there's, by the time they left, 1.2 million of them, by the time they left Egypt, 210 years after they were slaves. So you could almost understand Pharaoh's rationale. This is very scary. There are a lot of Jews. So my point is, though, between one verse and another, a lot of time can elapse. Right? But we don't see it that way because we see, okay, he planted the vineyard and he started drinking. That's not possible. Right? So 20, he planted the vineyard. I mean, you could say, I was just on this, I was just stuck on an ark for 40 days and 40 nights with my wife, their kids, and their wives. Obviously, I need a drink. Right? You could understand that. Now, here's the question you could ask, though. And I've spoken with Richard Fain about this. Okay. Was the drink package available on the ark? I mean, how much?
What's the allowance?
So the answer is no. The answer is that they behaved on the ark with the utmost morality. There were no sexual relations between partners. There was no drinking. There was no nothing. It wasn't a fun cruise. Right? So, now he comes off and he says, okay, I could use a drink. Fine, plants a vineyard. Fine, later on he drinks. And then everything is going to fall apart. Okay, so look what happens. Verse 21. Norman, let's pick up again with verse 21.
He drank of the wine and grew drunk and exposed himself under his tent. Ham, Canaan's father, saw his father's nakedness and outside told his 2 brothers.
Okay, so a lot of bad things are happening. First of all, he uncovers himself, which you're not supposed to do, I guess. His father, Ham just happens to be walking by, really, and peeks in the tent and sees what happened. Now, I'm going to show you something you're not going to believe. All right? I'm going to show you something you're not going to believe. If you look at the last word in Hebrew in verse 21, I don't know that I ever picked this up myself until this week. Anyone know how to say tent in Hebrew? Ohel. Right? Like, oh, hell. Right? Oh, hell. How do you say his in Hebrew? So mine is shali. Yours is shalcha, masculine. Female shalach. Shalo is his, and hers is shalah. So the O at the end of a word means his, and at the end of the word means hers. Clear so far? If you have a hey at the end, that's female. So if I'm going to say ohel shalah, that means her tent. Ohel shalo, his tent. Ohel shalah, her tent. Now, in Hebrew, there's contractions all the time. Ohelo, his tent. Ohala, her tent. So whose tent is he in? My English translation says his tent. But the Hebrew clearly says ohala. Right? It's pronounced ohalo, but it's ohala. It's with a hey. So he's drinking the wine and he becomes drunk. And you would say, why can't he be naked in his own tent? Aren't you allowed to have some privacy in your own tent? He's not in his tent. He's in her tent. Who's she? His wife. So why? Apparently they had different tents. Yeah, what are you gonna do? But they had a lot of land. Right? They had a lot of acreage. Right? Okay. So, if he's going into her tent without any clothes on, they'll have to spell it out. What was he coming to do there? He was coming to have relations with his wife. Okay? That's what's happening. Cham walks by. You're not supposed to look in when your parents are doing that. And he does. And he goes to tell, and then he tattles and, or spreads gossip to his sons about what's happening here. But you wouldn't get that if you didn't pick up that one Hebrew letter, ohala. Okay. Clear so far? Okay. Now that we understand that, we can finally read verse 22. Okay. Norm?
Ham, Canaan's father, saw his father's nakedness, and outside told his two brothers, Shem and Japheth.
Okay, so he saw his father's nakedness. What does that mean? So, if you look on the sheet, the last source is Leviticus chapter 18, verse 7 and 8. Instead of looking for it, because I knew that would take the rest of the class, I just put it there on the sheet. So look what it says, Leviticus chapter 18, verse 7 and verse 8. Your father's nakedness. So we said he saw his father's nakedness. So you could ask the question, well, what does that mean? Well, you don't have to ask the question because Leviticus 18:7 defines it for you. Your father's nakedness, which is what? That is, he saw his mother naked. She's your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. Do not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is the nakedness of your father. So seeing your mother naked is referred to as the nakedness of your father. Now, could it also mean he saw his father naked? Yes, but the word in Hebrew is erva. And erva has the connotation of something you're not permitted to see. For the purposes of that, someone you're forbidden to have a relationship with. Okay? So what happens here now, if we come back and reread verse 22, what we're actually saying is, and Cham, the father of Canaan. Now, what's the first thing you would ask yourself is, Cham, first of all, don't we already know he's the father of Canaan? Who cares? First of all, who cares? Second of all, why are you telling us that again? Third of all, what about his other sons? He has other sons. Why don't you tell us about those? Why does the Torah repeat here the father of Canaan? That's thoroughly bizarre. Unless there's something really important to know about Canaan. And if you didn't believe me the first time when he pointed out that there's a grandson named Canaan of Noah, but we're not mentioning any of the other grandsons, why repeat it just a few verses later when we already know that? It's weird, right? Okay? So, and Cham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness, meaning he probably saw his parents having relations, and went and told his two brothers. Now, his two brothers are the good guys. So what do? Okay, look at verse 23. Edith?
Shem and Japheth took a cloak and put it on both their shoulders. They walked backward and covered their father's nakedness. Facing backward, they did not see their father's nakedness.
Okay, so now if you look now, there's one more clue here, but it only works in Hebrew. Vayakach Shem v'Yafet, and Shem and Yafet took et simla. Does anyone know what a simla is in modern Hebrew? A dress. That's a female garment. So if they're going in to see his father's nakedness, and that's what they see, and they use a female garment to cover, that means they're covering her, and we're worried more about her nakedness than his nakedness. Right? I think we've always read it the other way, right? That what the sin was that they saw their father's nakedness. But when you look at Leviticus 18, you realize that's not what that means. By the way, I heard an amazing idea from this one rabbi I was listening. Oh yeah, sorry, Richard. Can we pass a mic back? Or grab? There we go.
This for another time, but I am hearing Moses wanting to see God's face, and God says, no, stand here in the cleft, shrouded behind, and you'll see my back. I don't know a parallel here, but you think about it and let me know what you think.
Okay, very nice. Yeah, the one thing that people think about this, if you ever go to the Kotel, the Western Wall, there's some people, as they're walking away from the Kotel, they walk backwards. Most of them have severe ankle issues because they trip and they break their ankles and stuff. So I don't, but there's a custom of when you get to there's like that area where you walk, the men's entrance and the women's entrance. At that point, I do this sometimes too. I'll walk backwards to there, and then once you get to that point, you can turn and go about your way. But the idea is you're not supposed to turn your back on something holy, or you're supposed to turn away from something that you're not supposed to see. Can you pass that mic then? It's like a press conference.
So if the Hebrew actually, I believe you, actually says it in the feminine, and the tent in the feminine, her tent and not his tent, and if it is a dress and not just a cloth, then why is it consistently translated differently in all of these different texts?
Yeah, no, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. But I can tell you when I was in rabbinic school, the professors used to always say, this is an awful translation. Now, the point of saying this is an awful translation is to show that you're smarter than whoever translated. And rabbinic school professors, they have that down to a science, right? What idiot wrote this? Oh, yeah, God. Although I have to tell you, I have a couple stories. So I'm teaching at University of Miami this semester, and I was grading midterms, and I'm just like offended by the level of writing. So I went back and I looked at some of my papers from rabbinic school, and he said, I was also a terrible writer at that age. It takes a long time to. I look back, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote this crap. And the professors that I used to hate for giving me bad grades, now I look back and I'm saying, they were actually generous. This is horrific. I can't believe I wrote this. I almost have to call them and apologize. I've hated you for 30 years, and now I realize you were right. There was something else I was going to tell you before that, and I totally forgot what it was. Oh yeah, okay, so. Thank you. So I was listening to this great rabbi give a lecture from Jerusalem, and he says, anytime science debates the Torah, it's not a problem for us. Like Maimonides says, if the Torah is truth and science is truth, and if two things that are truthful can't contradict each other, so if science contradicts the Torah, we just have to go back and re-understand the Torah. It means we misunderstood the Torah. So we have to go back and see where we were wrong. So a lot of times we go back to the Torah and say, oh, we used to think it meant this, but now we realize it means that. So he said, I don't have a problem with, this is a very orthodox rabbi. He said, I don't have a problem with evolution. I don't have a problem with the world being billions of years old because we always knew. The Torah says that, but that's not what it means. And so you go look in the Talmud and you try to figure out. But the Christians don't have that because they reject the Talmud. So they have to look at the Bible and prove things that aren't true, that we don't even believe are true. It says Bereshit, not Bareshit. In a beginning, not in the beginning. Could there have been other people who lived here before us? Could there have been dinosaurs and all kinds of monsters and all kinds of stuff that lived here before us? Sure. We're in a beginning. We're not in the beginning. We don't have a problem with that. But the Talmud tells you, yeah, we never thought that's what the Torah says. No one ever thought that's what it meant. But that's Judaism. So we have a lot more outs. We can get away with anything. You can make up anything. You could drive to shul. You could do anything. Okay. Some of this is funny. All right, let's keep going. So now we see Shem and Yafet are the good guys. They may be covering up their father, but the way we just looked at it, perhaps they're covering up their mother, and they're doing it in the most respectful way. Okay, just a couple sources. So verse 23, Sforno says, 16th century Italy, the first source on the sheet. Even when only covering their father, they walked away with their faces averting their eyes from him, it would have caused them additional grief to behold their father in such a state, which means that their father, something was really shaken up about him. And what that is, we're not quite sure yet. And I'm going to show you maybe an alternate understanding of the way you've thought about this before, but hopefully you're going to be amazed. But as we said before, a lot of time can elapse between two verses. And what the rabbis contend is that between verse 23 and verse 24, a tremendous amount of time elapses. Now, I don't know how long it takes for him to have gotten the wine from the vineyard, but it probably took a long time. And now going from verse 23 to verse 24, look what happens. Noah, verse 24. Edith, would you mind reading? Or Jeff, if you verse 24.
Noah awoke from his wine and realized what his small son had done to him. And he said, "Cursed is Canaan, a slave of slaves shall he be to his brothers."
Okay, now what is thoroughly bizarre about verse 24 followed by what we just learned in verse 25? Ed? We were talking about what Ham did. Why is Canaan cursed? Exactly. It makes no sense. So, now, this was some bender, or bender, whatever you call it. This was, I mean, he was, he must have been drinking for a long time. But I think we could all admit that we've been building up to something weird with Canaan. Right? Clear so far on that? Right? You saw, he mentioned why every time we mention Ham, and Ham's the bad guy, we mention specifically that he's the father of Canaan. And then, verse 25 seems thoroughly unfair, right? Why should Canaan be cursed? And why should he now and his lineage have to be slaves to the sons of Ham and Yafet for all time? Canaan didn't even do anything. What's the problem? Okay, now, in order to understand this, let's take a look at the Ibn Ezra, 13th century Spain, and his take on that verse, and Noah awoke. Jeff, would you mind reading that one too? The second source, and Noah awoke.
And Noah awoke. Scripture does not reveal what was done to Noah, but that as it may, Canaan was the culprit. The sequence of events...
Okay, do you see what just happened? He's saying maybe Ham didn't do anything. Maybe Canaan was the guilty party. Maybe. And maybe Ham is guilty because that's how he raised his son. I'm not sure yet. But something weird is going on according to the Ibn Ezra. Okay?
The sequence of events was as follows. Ham saw his father's nakedness, and unlike his brothers, did not cover him. On the contrary, he revealed what he saw. Canaan heard that Noah was lying naked in the tent and did something to Noah. However, the Bible does not tell us what he did to him.
Okay, so what we're saying here is Canaan was around and overheard that his father Ham told Shem and Yafet that his father was naked. And at that time, Canaan may have gone into the tent, and he's the one who uncovered his mother's nakedness. And that's why he's cursed. That's one opinion of the Ibn Ezra. I don't think it's right. Let's go on. Let's skip to Genesis Rabbah, inside his tent, oh hello. Now, you see, okay, so here, this is, I didn't make this up. The Midrash came up with this a long time ago. So look what it says here. Jeff, would you mind reading that, the Genesis Rabbah? Or Annabelle, whoever.
Inside his tent, Ohalo, Ohala is written. It was inside his wife's tent. Rab Huna said, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, son of Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, when Noah emerged from the ark, a lion struck him and mutilated him. When he came to engage in relations, his seed scattered and he was humiliated.
Yeah, okay, so that's one interesting interpretation. I don't think it's the accepted idea, but that's what the Midrash, that's one, Midrash gives a lot of different reasons. You know, so why'd they have two tents? You know, maybe they're different styles of interior design, you know. He said, I want the chair there, and she said, I want it here. We need two different tents. You know, I have a friend who lives here in Miami, and they have like a guest house in the back. It's just like one room. And he wanted it for his like man cave, because the rest of the house was designed by his wife. And so she said, well, why do you get it as the man cave? Maybe I want it as my space. And he said to her, you have the actual house as your cave. I thought that was funny. Remember last week, men are from one world. All right, doesn't. All right. Yeah. I'm just recording. I'm just reporting the Torah. One says, okay. Now, if you look in the Talmud, one last source, and then I'll try to explain what all of this means. Annabelle, would you mind reading the section of the Talmud from Sanhedrin?
Having cited the passage discussing Noah, the Gemara enters into a discussion about what was actually done to him by his younger son, Ham. Rav and Shmuel disagreed. One says that Ham castrated Noah, and one says that Ham sodomized him.
Okay, so a couple of things could have happened here. Now, why would it be in Ham's interest to, you know, castrating means that you can't have any more kids, right? Why would that be in Ham's interest for Noah not to have any more kids? Because 1/3 is better than 1/4 of inheritance, if you can do that kind of math in your head, right? And he's saying, I don't want you to have another son because that's going to eat into my inheritance. So that's one opinion of the rabbi. The other one was that there was some sort of sodomy involved. But I might argue, though, based on the verse, now this is going to be a little bit of a departure, and you can take it or leave it, but you might argue that when it says that he revealed his father's nakedness, and instead of the Talmud saying here that he sodomized him, it could be the same thing that Reuben did with Bilhah, and that actually Ham went in and had relations with his mother, in the same way that Reuben had relations with his father's concubine. And it wasn't that he had the act with Noah, but it was with his mom. Now, if you understand that, and now you look back, and this is Ham now, Ham going in and having relations with his mother, and if you, by the way, if I showed you a variety of other times in the Tanakh where this happened, where a son of a king went and had relations with his own mother, or maybe not his mother, but his father's wife. You know what I mean by that? Like his father's wife wasn't actually his mother because he was born by another woman. If you look at all of the different examples of why that happens, why would that happen? Because the son is trying to take over the power. And the way to assert that you're now the king, that you're taking over power, would be to sleep with your father's wife. That's what happens a number of times. So if you're going to make that argument here, what you could be saying was Ham was trying to take over. If you compared it, I'm not saying that's what we're doing, but if you compare, if you're arguing, and that's what the rabbis are doing in the Talmud, and saying, if we don't know, the rabbis in Talmud say, look, the video's grainy, it's hard to tell who it was, what was going on. But if it was the case, here's what the Talmud's saying, if what the Torah is trying to teach us is that he was going in to castrate him, then if that's what was happening, it was probably because he was worried for his inheritance. But if you don't think that's what it means, another possible alternative is he went in and he slept with his wife, and the reason we think that is because it happens elsewhere in the Tanakh, and this means that Ham is trying to take over and show that he's number one and in charge. Okay. So those are just two. I'm not saying either of those happened. I'm saying the Talmud's entertaining those two possibilities. Okay, you're stealing my thunder. I waited all week to break that story, and no. Okay, now this makes sense when you look at it that way. So look now at verse 21 again. He drank the wine and became drunk. He covered himself in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, I don't know why we need to know that, but saw his father's nakedness, told his two brothers. Shem and Japheth then came and covered up their mom, and so forth. Noah awoke from his wine and realized what his small son, why small son instead of youngest son, had done to him. When did Noah awoke here, I think means realized what happened. When did he realize what happened? When he saw that Naamah was pregnant. And he said, it's not mine. I was mutilated by a lion. I haven't had, I have other hobbies. Someone else is the father of whoever Naamah's carrying. And now I remember that Ham came into her tent. And now I realize that she's pregnant with Canaan. Canaan hadn't been born yet. And as soon as she says, what Noah really says is whoever's in her belly is going to be cursed forever. Because look how it came into the world. That's what I think it means. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. You can argue it, and that's fine. You always have the right to be wrong. You always have that right. Right? No, I mean, you could argue it. It's just a theory. It's just a theory. Like I said, the video is grainy. But if you don't buy into that, if you don't buy into that, you have a few problems. The problem is, why do we keep mentioning Canaan? Now, listen to this. Ham never becomes slaves to Shem and Japheth. It never happens. Because Shem is pretty much the Jews come from him, and Japheth, nobody really comes from him. I mean, they're the Jews. But Ham is never the Jews don't really have slaves. They have individual slaves, but they don't enslave whole other nations, and they certainly don't do it for all time. The Jews, we've had slaves all this time, last 2,000 years. Are you kidding me? That's not a thing. But now, if we look at it this way, Canaan has two sets of brothers. He's got Shem and he's got Canaan is the son of Ham. Ham has 4 sons. So yes, he's the slave to you could say Shem and Japheth, but he's also the brothers of the other sons of Ham, which includes Egypt and Persia and all those, all the people that come from them. And now you have what happens. Egypt, these other nations take over the region. And Canaan is the only one who kind of loses out because they get kicked out. They get kicked out, and they have no home, which is kind of interesting. So, let's look at it one more time and see what you think. But there are a few reasons to make this argument. Again, this is just an argument. You don't have to buy it. But why would it be, first of all, if Ham only went in and said, I was in our tent, I was in our father's tent, which is referred to as our mother's tent, so already that's weird, and the Midrash tells you it's the mother's tent, so already that makes no sense. But if you just looked at the story, maybe what we thought before, he went into his father's tent, and his father was naked. Okay. So then he goes to his brothers and he goes, guys, I've got a story you're not going to believe. You're not going to believe this. I walked by his tent. He was getting dressed. That's your news? Who cares? It's the stupidest thing. But maybe something else was going on there that he saw. Maybe it was very unusual. And maybe he was involved. And his brothers were so reviled. Why would they be reviled by the fact that he happened to see him naked? Who cares? But they were so reviled that they immediately went in there to console him and take care of him and cover him. And where was his mother? Where was Nama? It was her tent. And they went in to console her too. Why a simla? Why are they walking in with a dress? Why are they walking in with a female garment? None of it makes any sense. How do you plant a vineyard and then drink from the wine? And how do you look at in verse 20, he planted the vineyard, he drinks from the wine, and then all this stuff happens. Verse 24, he woke up and realized what his son had done to him. What did his son do to him? All he told them was that he was naked. Who cares? And then he comes in and he says, cursed be Canaan, who's not even involved. So none of the story makes sense. None of it. Until you get later to the book of Leviticus and you see that ervat avicha, the nakedness of your father, means the nakedness of your mother. Then you come back and say, why would we be talking about the nakedness of her mother? And you look at the Hebrew and says, oh my gosh, they were in her tent. And oh my gosh, they covered him with a female garment. And oh my gosh, he was drunk. But then when he woke up, something was totally off. And he doesn't curse the person who did it to him, he curses the next person. And slowly you start to put all of this together and you see what happens. But what we see here, I think, is the makings of the future of the history of the Jewish people. Because Shem is the mentor of Abraham. And Abraham is the father of the Jewish people. And the very first thing that we'll see next week, the very first thing that God says to Abraham, which is also happens to be the very first thing that God ever says to a Jew, is Lech lecha me'artzecha u'mivicha mibeit u'mimoladetecha mibeit avicha asher eretz areka. So listen to how interesting that is. It says, get up and go from the place that you live to a place that I will show you, which we know is Israel. But it's not called Israel. It's called Canaan. So you're going to go to this place called Canaan. And it's called Canaan. And the Canaanites are there, but it's not their land, it's your land. I'm giving it to your sons. And what you're going to do is get Canaan out of there because they don't belong there, because they're cursed. And they're ultimately, in the end, they're going to serve you, not the other way around. So they think that the place is called Canaan, but because of what happened, they're going to be cursed, and you're going to be allowed to kick them out. Now, ultimately, what happens is Abraham goes there, and it says the iniquity of the people who live there is not yet complete, so you can't kick them out yet. Because you can't judge someone based on what their father did. So you say, okay, this nation's cursed. They're not going to do very well. You know who comes from them? Eliezer. Let me just tell you one last story. You know, Eliezer was the servant of Abraham. Listen to how profound that is. Eliezer was the servant of Abraham. Eliezer is a descendant of Ham. Abraham only has one servant whose name we know, and he's from Ham, which is already an indication that the Canaanites are going to be subservient to Israel. Okay? So, as the Canaanites are subservient to Israel, now, in the Midrash, there's this amazing story that when Eliezer wanted, and this is actually mentioned in the Torah too, Eliezer wanted to, he goes and finds Rebecca, right? You know the story, the camels. So he goes and finds, she waters his camels, brings back Rebecca, and Eliezer says, I want to marry Rebecca. Why did it have to be for, why does it have to be for Isaac? I'll marry her. And you know what Abraham's response to him is? How could someone who comes from a nation that's blessed marry someone like you who comes from a nation that's cursed. That's what he says. Because you're from Ham, and it won't work. So we already see that we're building this case. So finally, the land has a threshold, and when you reach a certain amount of sins, you get kicked out. That's what happened to the Jewish people. We got kicked out twice too, because we reached our threshold of sins, and God said, the land won't take you here anymore, but we came back. Took a couple thousand years, but we came back. But the Canaanites reached their threshold, got kicked out, and they weren't allowed to come back. Which means that this curse held. And so for all this time, you might ask yourself the case, what gave Israel the right to go to Canaan and kick all the people there out? And Rashi, this is how Rashi begins his commentary on the Torah. Someday people are going to say that you Jewish people stole the land from the Canaanites. So Rashi's answer is, well, the world belongs to God and he can do whatever he wants with it. That's why the Torah starts off with creation, to show that the world belongs to God. But a more factual, if you continue the argument, what you see here is the Canaanites are Ham, and they were born into the world. Canaan actually himself was born into the world because his father raped his grandmother. Well, actually raped his mother. His father raped his mother. And that's how he came into the world. And that is not like the way you want to start off as a holy nation. And so ultimately, from the very beginning, this is the most important point. From the very beginning of the Torah, Canaan was always meant to be temporary in the land of Israel, and the Jewish people were always meant to be permanent in the land of Israel. And sometimes our detractors today make the case that the land belongs to other nations who were there before, including the Philistines. Ever heard of them? The Palestinians today have no relation to them. There's no connection. They're not the same people. All of those people of Canaan, they don't exist anymore because they were cursed. They're not around anymore. And so when the Jewish people moved into the land of Israel, it was exactly how it was supposed to be. And this is where it all comes from. Okay, Shabbat Shalom.
It doesn't make any sense. Just as I'm reading.
The guy was drunk, and so they saw him without his bathrobe.
Yeah, what's the big deal?
It's a big deal. Why is he cursed forever?
Who cares? Right?
A little overreaction.
What is murder?
Right there. Something's wrong. That's our story. I'm sure the Canaanites don't see it that way.
Well, screw it.
Lo votamos, lo votamos.
And
children of incest. Abraham never had it. Yeah, and that's why he had to buy the cave for his wife, because the land didn't belong to him. Because he wasn't, the promise was going to be your kid. Oh, yeah. That is very good. I think I did that last year, or maybe a couple years ago. That I saw, because I came to my church. Oh, yeah. Celebration of Noah. Yeah. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. 5 minutes before. We fixed it.
No, I didn't even today.
Today it didn't work?
No,
They said they fixed it.
no, and that's why I was like,
Cut off again.
No, of course.
yes, like no, it got no. I mean, I listened to Bruce today before coming here, and
Oh,
5
sorry.
minutes before we leave, like in 5 minutes,
Yeah.
it stopped. So it exactly finished at 59, and I was like taking notes, and then suddenly it finished, and I'm like,
Last week.
yes,
Yeah,
no, I'm like, no.
But yeah,
And I'm
I
like,
know. I can explain it to you if you want.
Yes, because
But
I was like, oh,
I know, I heard that.
I was like,
But they said they finished it for this week. So today it worked.
I listened to it like 5 a.m. Ah, this one. Yeah, no, but I'm missing the who killed the, I'm like, and you went to Harmony,
Yeah.
whoever.
I know. So annoying. But Bobby fixed
To be put over there.
Send me an email and I'll write you this.
Yes, because I was like, no way, never put
I
it.
had
I
to.
know.
I know, I got a lot of complaints. But I told them to fix it for today. But send me an email and I'll write you out the conclusion. I need that too. Send me an email and I'll send it to you.
And then I'm going to, I have like this question about the meeting in Torah thing of last week. There's one there that talks about the nations where, you are supposed to get or able to
Think
be
that's
married and
we definitely need three. I don't know.
What that means is that the father is allowed to make an arranged marriage from that place. But you still live with the father until you're old enough to get married. And the girl, when she does, when she is ready to get married, and the father made an arranged marriage for her, she doesn't want to do it, doesn't matter. But, arranged marriages still happen in the Orthodox world. It's part of their...
no, that I understand. It did not come across
No,
that
no,
way,
no.
and
It never does.
I was like, what is going on?
So here's what Maimonides does. He goes through the Talmud and he just takes out the law. But he leaves
Testing
out
1, 2.
the So you never get the why. You only get the law.
Where do you get the why?
In the Talmud.
Oh,
The
so you
Talmud
need
is-
to go back to the Talmud on each of those.
Right, so he, because what's happening is the Talmud's really hard to understand. People weren't studying it, but they wanted to know the law. So he just wrote, here's the law. He took out all the explanations. So, but that's why you have me. Email me and I'll tell you.
No, but you're easy, and I saw that. And I was like,
Hablo todas. ¿Oíste? Todas. Completa. Todo en forma de teatro. Todo. Aquellas, todo.
I have seen actually. Have that out.
I started doing it too. I saw your thing.
Thank you. Start, right?
The royal.
Yeah, I took her. I definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
The moment in which I was not happy.
Most of us do first read radios, right? Well, look,
Testing 1, 2. 1, 2.
you, sir.
You think that
Even the shofar? I gave you the marriage stuff.
no, it's actually interesting because also there is this respect and there are some things that are very nuanced. The ordinary stuff.
You have to understand, you're reading 12th century material, and a lot has changed since then. Like, a lot of times, this is the halakha, this is what they did. And then in the notes on the side, it says, but we don't do it that way anymore. You have to read the commentary. It's like, well, this is not how we do it. It's not how we hold it. It's not our custom today.
So if I go back, I have that one. I didn't really do it because I was not like 10 minutes, like 10 hours. If I go back to this section, I don't think so.
But if you get a degree at Southern University, then you'll be able to.
I know, I told you. Zoom, I will read at noon and I would have.
Yeah, once you have that,
7 p.m. at home.
well, yeah, we're going to have to do the Zoom class.
Yes, I mean, I would sign up immediately.
But a degree in Southern University is like one of any of the great achievements.
Right, you know, it's like that reggae and then, They go to the Harvard. I hope we don't get the campus stuff together. Graham University have the campus.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
That's very funny. That's very funny. Don't worry, Cheryl will put up with that.
yeah.
I didn't tell you this, Rabbi.
Shabbos.
Rabbi, I didn't tell you this.
Oh, no.
Okay, thank
Never.
What's the Rambam proof from Monday? What's the what? The Rambam proof.
He was
Which you told my son.
phenomenal, right? I was so excited that he was
All right.
coming.
You're not gonna believe it. Oh wait, only Genesis. You have the whole. Yeah. Give me Exodus. I gotta get to the conservative minion, but let's try to show you this. All right.
Oh, man. He's been hiding.
Okay, so see, this is. You ever see the Maimonides proof in Exodus? So if you look here, Exodus 11:9. So it says, "Vayomer Hashem el Moshe." God says to Moses, "Lo yishma alechem paro." Pharaoh's not going to listen to you. Laman rabot mavtai be'eretz Mitzrayim. In order that my marvels will be increased in Egypt. So I told the kids, this verse is a prediction that Maimonides is going to be born 2,500 years later. And they say, that's ridiculous. So I said, well, Maimonides' first name was Moshe. So, and he lived in Egypt. So is that enough to convince you? And they say, of course not. He was named after him. Who cares where he lived? So Maimonides moved to Egypt. What's the big deal? So then, they know Rambam because our school is called Rambam. So I said, if you take the last 4 words of that verse, that sort of sound like his life a little bit. It says Resh, Mem, Bet, Mem. The initials. That's his initials. That's the only place in the whole Tanakh where there are 4 words in a row where the initials spell Rambam. So okay, they're still skeptical. So I said, well, one of the things, what wonder, it says, in order that my marvels will be increased in Egypt, what wonder is it that Maimonides did? Well, when he was in Egypt, he wrote the Mishnah Torah, what we're studying, which was like this marvelous thing at the time. He was able to produce this. He said, well, where does it say Mishnah Torah? So, you know how many days it took to get from Egypt to Mount Sinai to get the Torah? 50 days. Well, 49 days, that's why we kept Shavuot, right? We count 7 weeks of Shavuot. Then on the 50th day, the next day, they got the Torah. So it took 50 days to get Torah from when they left Egypt. So if you count from this man in Moshe,
Okay. And minions.
Moshe, you count 50 letters, and I had them count.
Yeah.
The next letter is a shin. And if you count from there 50 letters, the next letter is a nun. If you count from there 50 letters, the next letter is a hey, which spells Mishnah, which is the first word first name of his book. So they counted and they're like, well, it comes out 50, 50, 50, 50, Mishnah. He said, but there's no Torah. The book is called Mishnah Torah. So later on, you read a little bit further, it says the 14th day of the month, the first day of the month of Nisan, it's the only date in here. That was my mommy's birthday. So now we have his name. We have where he lived. We have that he did something cool in Egypt. We have his initials. And we have, if you count from the M in his name, 50 letters, it spells Moshe. It spells Mishnah. That's a lot of coincidences in one word. Then there's only one date in the whole place. It happens to be my mom's birthday. It's born on the 14th of Nisan. Then if you come all the way down, I forget where it is, but there's a Tuf. It's really far down. And you go to the Tuf. If you count 50 letters, you get a Vav. If you count 50 letters, you get a Resh. You count 50 letters, you get a Hey. It spells Torah. So now we have Mishnah up here and Torah down here. So what's Mishnah Torah? Mishnah Torah is explaining all the mitzvahs. That's it. Just how many mitzvahs in the Torah? 613. So he said, yeah, but Mishnah's way up there, Torah way down there. The Hey in Mishnah, the end of the first word, and the Tuf of the second word. And all these letters in between. You count up all those letters in between, it comes out to exactly 613 of a day. Exactly 613. In between Mishnah and Torah.
I picked my son up on Monday night, and the whole way home he's talking about it.
It's mind-boggling.
That's amazing.
Leviticus somewhere, if there were something that had nothing to do with Moses, and didn't have his initials, and didn't have Mishnah, and didn't have his birthday.
Check. Check, check, check. These could be louder. This could be louder. This could be a lot louder. This could be a lot louder. These could be a lot louder. I don't know. Sounds like it's the...
Yeah.
Check, 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 check.